Good evening, friends. Tonight we dim the torchlight and slip beyond the castle walls, following the muted footsteps of medieval assassins. We'll trace frost-dusted rooftops, hear the slow scrape of a whetstone on steel, and feel the patient breath of watchers who wait all night for a single fateful heartbeat. Across 4 unhurried chapters, we'll sense the chill of a lonely vigil, meet the enigmatic master of Alamut, examine bitter powders ground in shadowed rooms, and finally stand beside uneasy nobles who drift toward sleep with one eye open. If gentle, story-rich history helps your mind settle, please tap like, subscribe, and share where and when you're listening. I'm always comforted by how wide this quiet circle reaches. So, lower the glow of your screen, let the hush of your own room settle around you, nestle deeper into your pillow, and allow the restless echoes of the Middle Ages to soften as our journey calmly begins. Imagine yourself in the year 1348. The Black Death creeps across Europe, wars rage between kingdoms, and in the shadows of this chaos, certain individuals make their living through the most dangerous of trades. You are perched on a frost-covered rooftop in a nameless French town, your breath forming small clouds in the bitter February air. The clay tiles beneath you are slick with ice, and one wrong movement could send you tumbling 3 stories to the cobblestones below. Yet you remain perfectly still, wrapped in a dark woolen cloak that smells of smoke and old sweat, watching, waiting. This is your 3rd night observing the merchant's house across the narrow street. You've memorized every detail: the servant who empties the chamber pots at dawn, the guard who dozes off during the 4th hour of his watch, the squeaky hinge on the back garden gate that no one has bothered to oil. Your employer, whose face you've never seen, wants to know everything about this man's routines, his vulnerabilities, his moments of carelessness. The cold has long since numbed your fingers and toes. You flex them periodically, just enough to maintain circulation, but not enough to disturb the layer of frost that has formed on your cloak, helping you blend into the roofline. Below, a drunk stumbles through the alley, singing off-key about lost love. You track his movement without turning your head, a skill learned through years of practice. In your belt pouch, wrapped in oiled leather, are small cakes of bread, hard as stones now, but they keep hunger at bay without requiring you to leave your position. Beside them, a small vial of liquid that isn't water, a stimulant derived from willow bark and other herbs meant to keep you alert through these long, frozen hours. The taste is bitter enough to make your eyes water, but it works. As dawn approaches, you begin your careful descent. Each handhold and foothold has been tested on previous nights. The wooden beam that looks solid but is actually rotten, the stone that will shift under weight, you know them all. Your soft leather shoes, their soles wrapped in cloth for silence, find purchase on invisible ledges. Back in your rented room, you never stay in the same place more than a week. You warm your hands over a small brazier. The landlady thinks you're a traveling scribe, which explains the ink stains on your fingers and why you keep such odd hours. She doesn't know about the false bottom in your travel chest, where you keep your true tools. You pull out a mortar and pestle, both made of smooth stone. Tonight's task requires preparation of a special mixture. The base is simple enough: nightshade berries, which grow wild in the countryside and can be gathered without suspicion. But the other ingredients are more exotic: powdered arsenic, purchased from a rat catcher who asks no questions; mercury, bought from an alchemist under the pretense of treating syphilis; and wolfsbane root, which you cultivated yourself in a hidden garden outside the city walls. The grinding is slow, methodical work. Too fast and the heat from friction might alter the compounds. Too coarse and the powder won't dissolve properly in wine or food. You learned this from an old Moorish woman in Toledo, who taught you in exchange for a favor you'd rather not remember. She showed you how to test each batch on small animals, mice usually, to ensure potency without waste. The finished powder goes into tiny paper packets, each sealed with wax. A full dose would kill within hours, causing symptoms that might be mistaken for plague or flux. A smaller dose, administered over weeks, would produce a wasting sickness that no physician could cure. You've seen both methods employed. Neither is pleasant, but in this profession, pleasant is rarely a consideration. Later, as evening falls, you make your way to the city gates. The guards there know you by yet another name, Marcus the Wool Merchant. You've cultivated this identity for months, complete with fake documents and rehearsed stories about trade routes and profit margins. Tonight, you need to arrange passage for a certain wagon to enter without inspection. The sergeant of the watch is a practical man. He has 7 children and a wife with expensive tastes. The small leather purse you slip him contains enough silver to feed his family for 2 months. He doesn't ask what will be in the wagon. He doesn't want to know. But tomorrow morning, when it arrives bearing wine casks with false bottoms, he'll be conveniently called away to deal with a disturbance on the other side of the gate. These bribes eat through most of your earnings. People imagine assassins as wealthy, but the reality is far different. Between paying informants, purchasing materials, maintaining multiple identities, and setting aside funds for eventual escape, there's little left for luxury. You eat simple food, wear unremarkable clothes, and live in modest quarters. Anything more would draw attention, and attention is death in this profession. The fear is constant, a cold weight in your stomach that never fully goes away. Every knock at the door could be soldiers, every friendly greeting from a stranger could be a trap. You've trained yourself to sleep lightly, with a dagger under your pillow and your boots always on. More than once, you've fled through windows in the middle of the night, leaving everything behind except what you carry on your person. You know what happens to captured assassins. You've seen the broken bodies displayed in town squares, the result of days of systematic torture. The rack that slowly dislocates every joint, the hot irons that burn through flesh to bone, the water torture that makes men confess to crimes they never committed. Some kingdoms favor the wheel, where limbs are methodically shattered before the victim is left to die slowly in public view. This knowledge shapes every decision you make. You memorize not just your target's routines, but also escape routes from every building you enter. You practice picking locks in complete darkness. You learn to scale walls despite injuries, to swim across frozen rivers, to ride stolen horses bareback through forests at night. The loneliness is perhaps the hardest burden. You haven't used your real name in 5 years. Sometimes, late at night, you whisper it to yourself just to remember the sound. You had a family once, parents, siblings, perhaps even a sweetheart, but they believe you're dead. It's safer for them that way. Every relationship in your current life is a transaction or a deception. The baker who sells you bread doesn't know you test each loaf for poison before eating. The prostitute whose bed you occasionally share is paid extra for her discretion and for allowing you to keep your weapons close. Even the priest who hears your carefully edited confessions would turn you over to the authorities if he knew the full truth. You develop habits to maintain sanity in this isolation. Some assassins drink heavily, though this dulls the reflexes. Others lose themselves in gambling or fighting. You've chosen to study languages, spending quiet hours memorizing Latin texts and Arabic phrases. It serves a practical purpose. The more tongues you speak, the more places you can disappear to, but it also keeps your mind sharp and gives you something to focus on besides the weight of your sins. In the marketplace, you practice the art of being forgettable. You adopt a slight stoop to appear less threatening. You speak in a mild, slightly higher voice than your natural tone. You've trained yourself to walk with a subtle limp, different each day, that makes you seem harmless while actually allowing you to conceal weapons in creative ways. The actual killing is often the simplest part. A blade slipped between ribs in a crowded street, poison in a cup at a feast, an arrow from a concealed position. The preparation takes months, but the act itself is over in seconds. Then comes the most dangerous time, the escape. You've learned to resist the urge to run. Nothing draws attention like someone in a hurry. Instead, you walk calmly, perhaps stopping to purchase an apple from a vendor or to listen to a street preacher. You've already changed clothes once in a predetermined hiding spot and will change again before leaving the city. The weapon has been disposed of, dropped down a well, thrown in a river, or left in a place that will implicate someone else. Payment comes through intermediaries, often people who don't even know what they're delivering. A merchant brings you a shipment of cloth with coins sewn into the hem. A traveling monk carries a letter of credit to be redeemed in another city. Sometimes payment is simply the cancellation of a debt or a promise of future protection. You've learned never to trust promises. Your tools are simple but effective. A thin blade that can be concealed along the forearm. A garrote made from silk cord, strong enough to strangle but soft enough to carry without detection. A small crossbow that can be disassembled and hidden in the false bottom of a merchant's trunk. Each weapon is maintained obsessively, cleaned, oiled, sharpened. A dull blade or a jammed mechanism means death. You study anatomy with the dedication of a physician, knowing exactly where to strike for a quick death or a slow one. The space between the third and fourth rib, angled upward, reaches the heart. The femoral artery in the thigh will cause someone to bleed out in minutes. A puncture to the lung will leave them drowning in their own blood, able to speak only in whispers. But you also know the places that will incapacitate without killing. Sometimes a client wants their enemy to suffer but survive. Sometimes you need to disable a guard without raising an alarm. These precision strikes require even more skill than killing. The apothecary shops are your libraries. You memorize which merchants sell what, who asks questions and who doesn't. You learn the legitimate uses for deadly substances: arsenic for rats, mercury for mirrors, antimony for cosmetics, and practice the patter of someone buying for these purposes. You've developed a network of dead drops throughout the city. A hollow tree in the park where messages can be left. A loose stone in the cathedral wall that conceals small packages. A particular grave in the cemetery where no one is actually buried, but where items can be safely hidden. You check these places on rotating schedules, never establishing a pattern. The coded messages you receive are works of art in themselves. Sometimes they're hidden in legitimate correspondence, every third word spelling out instructions. Sometimes they're written in invisible ink made from lemon juice or urine, only appearing when heated. Once, your orders came in the form of a song, with the notes corresponding to letters. Sleep comes hard when your profession is death. You dream of faces, some accusing, some merely surprised. You wake with your hand on your dagger, scanning the room for threats that exist only in memory. The church says your soul is damned, and perhaps they're right, but theological debates are a luxury you can't afford. You maintain physical conditioning with an almost religious devotion. Each morning, before the city wakes, you perform exercises learned from various masters. Flexibility training from a Venetian contortionist, breathing techniques from an Egyptian strangler, balance work inspired by Byzantine acrobats. Your body is your primary tool, and like any craftsman, you keep it in perfect working order. The clothing you wear is chosen with careful consideration. dark colors that don't show blood, fabrics that don't rustle when you move, hoods that obscure your face without seeming suspicious. You've learned to sew hidden pockets into every garment, for weapons, for poisons, for documents that might buy your freedom if caught. Sometimes you're hired to make death look like an accident. These assignments require even more preparation. You study architectural weaknesses that might cause a convenient collapse. You learn which foods naturally interact badly with certain medicines. You observe horses to know exactly how to cause them to throw their riders. The mathematical precision required for some operations would surprise those who think of assassins as mere thugs. Calculating poison dosages based on body weight, timing multiple events to create alibis, understanding the physics of trajectory for long-distance shots. You keep these calculations in a cipher of your own devising, hidden among what appear to be merchants' accounts. Weather becomes an ally or enemy depending on your needs. Rain covers the sound of footsteps but makes climbing difficult. Snow leaves tracks but also drives people indoors. Wind can carry poison gas but also deflect arrows. You learn to read the sky like a sailor, planning operations around the conditions that favor success. The constant vigilance exhausts you more than any physical labor. Every conversation must be analyzed for hidden meanings, every new face memorized in case you see it again. You develop a mental catalog of thousands of details: guard rotations, servant gossip, merchant schedules, noble feuds, any of which might become relevant. Your few possessions are chosen for portability and versatility. A cloak that can serve as rope when twisted, boots with hollow heels for concealing documents, a walking stick that disguises a blade. Everything you own must justify its weight, for you never know when you'll need to abandon everything and run. The irony is not lost on you that in a profession dedicated to ending lives, you've become something barely alive yourself. You exist in the spaces between, neither noble nor common, neither soldier nor civilian. You're a ghost before you're dead, haunting the edges of society. Yet there's a strange pride in your skills. Few could do what you do. The precision, the patience, the ability to become anyone and no one. It's a dark art, certainly, but an art nonetheless. And like any artist, you constantly refine your craft, even as it slowly destroys you. As midnight approaches, you prepare for another night's work. The rituals are always the same: checking weapons, reviewing plans, steadying nerves. You wrap yourself in darkness like armor and step out into streets where death walks on soft shoes. Tomorrow you might be dead or captured. Next week you might be in another country under another name. But tonight you have work to do. And somewhere in this city, someone is about to learn that even stone walls and armed guards cannot stop the shadows from reaching them. The candle in your room burns low as you make final preparations. Soon you'll extinguish it and become one with the darkness. But for now, in these last moments of relative safety, you allow yourself the small comfort of its warm light, knowing that comfort, like everything else in your life, is temporary. In the year 1090, in the mountainous regions of northern Persia, a man in his mid-50s stood at the base of a seemingly impregnable fortress. The castle of Alamut, perched like an eagle's nest atop a narrow rock that rose 600 feet above the valley floor. This man was Hasan-i Sabbah, and he was about to transform both this fortress and the very nature of political power across the medieval world. Imagine yourself traveling back to his childhood in Qom, a city of dust and learning in central Persia. Young Hasan was born around 1050 into a Twelver Shia family, his father a learned man who valued education above wealth. The boy showed an unusual appetite for knowledge, devouring texts on theology, mathematics, and philosophy with an intensity that worried his teachers. They recognized brilliance, but also something else: a quality of absolute focus that seemed almost inhuman. By the age of 17, Hasan had already mastered Arabic, Persian, and the intricate theological debates that divided Islam. But it was his encounter with Ismaili missionaries that would change everything. These men spoke of hidden knowledge, of an imam who would return to establish justice on earth, of mysteries within mysteries that only the initiated could comprehend. The young scholar found himself drawn to their geometric precision of thought, their emphasis on personal discipline, and their vision of a world transformed through patient, careful action. The journey that brought him to Alamut began decades earlier in Cairo. Hasan had traveled to the Fatimid capital, the greatest city in the Islamic world, where Ismaili doctrine flourished under the protection of the Caliph. For 3 years, he studied in the great libraries, memorizing not just religious texts but also works on architecture, medicine, astronomy, and the arts of governance. He observed how the Fatimid state operated, its networks of informants, its systems of loyalty, its methods of projecting power far beyond its borders. But Hasan's time in Cairo ended abruptly. A succession dispute split the Ismaili leadership, and Hasan found himself supporting the claim of Prince Nizar against his brother. When Nizar lost, Hasan was forced to flee, beginning a journey that would take him through Syria, Mesopotamia, and finally back to Persia. During these travels, he wasn't simply running. He was observing, learning, building networks. The Seljuk Turks who ruled Persia were Sunni Muslims, hostile to Ismaili beliefs. They controlled vast armies, fortified cities, and wealth beyond imagination. Yet Hasan recognized their weakness. They ruled through force over populations that didn't share their beliefs or culture. In the mountains of northern Persia, particularly in the region of Daylam, ancient communities maintained their independence, connected by kinship and custom rather than submission to distant sultans. Hasan spent years moving through these mountain communities, speaking in small gatherings, converting local leaders one by one. He didn't promise wealth or immediate power. Instead, he offered something more precious: purpose, divine mission, and a place in a cosmic struggle between truth and falsehood. His converts called him Sayyidna, our master, and they meant it with a devotion that went beyond normal religious feeling. The acquisition of Alamut itself was a masterpiece of patient planning. The fortress belonged to a Seljuk governor, but Hasan had spent 3 years placing his converts among the garrison and servants. When the moment came, there was no battle, no siege. The governor simply woke one morning to find that everyone in his fortress now obeyed a different master. Hasan paid him 3,000 gold dinars for the property. A receipt still existed centuries later, and the man left, probably grateful to escape with his life. Alamut became more than a fortress. It transformed into a self-sufficient community, a training ground, and a library that would become legendary. Hasan immediately began improvements: new cisterns carved from solid rock to store water, terraced gardens that could feed the garrison through any siege, and most importantly, a systematic program of education that would produce the most feared warriors of the medieval period. The young men who came to Alamut were carefully selected. Intelligence mattered more than physical strength, though both were developed. They studied languages: Arabic, Persian, Turkish, and often Greek or Latin. They memorized the Quran but also studied the texts of their enemies, learning Sunni theology well enough to debate scholars. They trained with weapons, but more importantly, they learned patience, disguise, and the art of living undetected for years if necessary. The training regime was comprehensive and demanding. Before dawn, the students would rise for prayers and meditation, focusing their minds on their divine mission. Physical training followed: climbing the sheer cliffs around Alamut without ropes, learning to move silently across any terrain, developing the stamina to travel for days without rest. They practiced with various weapons, but the emphasis was always on the dagger, silent, concealed, and decisive. But the true innovation of Hasan's system was psychological. His followers, who came to be known as Fighter-I, those who sacrifice, were taught that their lives meant nothing compared to their mission. Death in service to the Imam was not just honorable but guaranteed paradise. This wasn't mere fanaticism. It was a carefully constructed worldview reinforced through ritual, study, and communal reinforcement. The stories of a secret garden where young men were drugged with hashish and shown paradise, complete with beautiful women and flowing wine, are almost certainly later fabrications. The word assassin itself, derived from hashishin or hashish users, was likely a slur invented by their enemies. The reality was both simpler and more sophisticated. Hasan created true believers through education and ideology, not drugs and deception. The hierarchy Hasan established at Alamut was precise and unbreakable. At the top was Hasan himself, the Grand Master or Sheikh al-Jabal, the Old Man of the Mountain, as the Crusaders would later call him. Below him were the Da'is, the preachers who managed territories and recruited new members. Then came the Rafiqs, the companions who had achieved higher levels of initiation. The Fighter-I formed the active arm, while below them were the Lasics, the adherents who supported the community but hadn't taken the ultimate oaths. Life at Alamut followed rigid patterns. Hasan himself set the example. He left his quarters only twice in 34 years, spending his time in study, correspondence, and planning. He had both his sons executed, one for drinking wine and another on suspicion of plotting his assassination. This wasn't cruelty but demonstration. The law applied to everyone, even the master's blood. The castle's daily routine revolved around prayer, study, and preparation. The library grew constantly, with scribes copying texts and translating works from multiple languages. Hasan himself wrote theological treatises, though most were later destroyed. The community practiced crafts, metalworking for weapons, chemistry for poisons and medicines, agriculture for sustenance. The first major assassination attributed to Hasan's followers occurred in 1092. The target was Nizam al-Mulk, the powerful vizier of the Seljuk Empire. For months, a Fighter-I named Abu Tahir had lived as a Sufi mystic, gradually gaining access to the vizier's inner circle. On October 14th, as Nizam al-Mulk traveled to Baghdad, Abu Tahir approached him as if to present a petition. The dagger struck before anyone could react. The assassin made no attempt to flee, accepting his immediate death as planned. The psychological impact exceeded the physical. Nizam al-Mulk had been surrounded by guards, considered untouchable. His death sent a message that would echo through centuries. No one was safe. The Seljuk Sultan himself died weeks later, possibly poisoned, and the empire fragmented into competing factions. The methods developed at Alamut were revolutionary in their patience. Fighter-I would spend years establishing false identities. They might serve as trusted servants, gradually earning positions close to their targets. Some became scholars or religious teachers, using their positions to gather intelligence or gain access. The emphasis was never on escape, but on certainty of success. One Fighter-I spent 7 years as a groom in a prince's stable, waiting for the perfect moment. Another learned medicine and served as a court physician for a decade before striking. These weren't impulsive acts, but careful operations planned sometimes generations in advance. Hasan kept detailed records, though most were destroyed when Alamut finally fell. The network expanded beyond Alamut. Hasan established secondary fortresses throughout the mountains, Lambaser, Girdku, Maimondiz. Each operated semi-independently but answered to Alamut. Urban cells operated in Damascus, Aleppo, Isfahan, and other major cities. Members recognized each other through subtle signals, specific ways of tying turbans, coded phrases in everyday conversation, marks on doorways invisible to the uninitiated. The economics of Hasan's operation were surprisingly sophisticated. The mountain fortresses controlled key trade routes, collecting tolls that funded operations. They produced fine textiles and metalwork that commanded premium prices. But most importantly, they offered protection. Rulers who cooperated faced no threat, while those who opposed them lived in constant fear. Communication between fortresses used various methods. Carrier pigeons flew between towers, bearing messages in cipher. Signal fires could relay simple messages across vast distances in hours. Human messengers traveled disguised as merchants or pilgrims, their real purpose hidden even from fellow Ismailis who might aid them unknowingly. The selection process for Fida-I was elaborate. Young men were observed for years before being approached. Intelligence, physical capability, and absolute devotion were essential. But they also looked for particular personality traits, the ability to live double lives without breaking, patience that could endure years of waiting, and a certain detachment from normal human connections. The education provided went far beyond military training. Fida-I studied poetry and could compose verses appropriate to their cover identities. They learned courtly manners, religious rituals of various sects, and the customs of different social classes. Some specialized in particular regions or cultures, becoming perfect mimics of local populations. Hasan's influence reached the Crusader states established after 1099. The Frankish chronicles speak with mixture of fear and fascination about the old man of the mountain. Some Crusader lords attempted alliances with him against common Muslim enemies. Others paid tribute to avoid his attention. The military orders, Templars and Hospitallers, studied his methods, adopting some for their own intelligence networks. The most famous Crusader encounter came with Conrad of Montferrat. The Marquis had offended the Ismailis, though accounts differ on how. Two Fida-I disguised as Christian monks struck him down in Tyre in 1192. They had lived in the city for 6 months, attending church services and earning reputations as holy men. Even as they died under torture, they supposedly smiled, confident in their paradise. Richard the Lionheart himself received warning from the assassins. Legend says Hasan's successor sent a messenger who placed a dagger on Richard's pillow while he slept, along with a note warning against certain actions. Whether true or not, the story illustrates the psychological warfare the assassins perfected. The threat was often more powerful than the execution. The theological framework Hasan constructed was intricate. He taught that the current age was one of concealment, where truth was hidden and believers must practice taqiyya, permissible dissimulation. The resurrection would come not through divine intervention, but through human action guided by divine knowledge. Each assassination was thus a sacred act, bringing the world closer to justice. His followers developed elaborate justifications for their actions. They distinguished between the greater jihad, internal spiritual struggle, and the lesser jihad of physical conflict. But they added a third category, the removal of specific individuals whose existence prevented divine justice. This wasn't war but surgery, removing tumors from the body of Islam. The library at Alamut became legendary even among enemies. Scholars spoke of texts preserved nowhere else. Greek philosophical works, ancient Persian histories, astronomical observations from Babylon. When the Mongols finally conquered Alamut in 1256, their historian Juwayni spent days in the library before it burned, desperately copying what he could. Hasan's personal life remained largely mysterious. He had married in Cairo and had 3 sons, 2 of whom he executed. His wife and daughters lived at Alamut but are barely mentioned in records. He spent his final years in almost complete isolation, communicating only through written messages. Some said he was writing a great work synthesizing all knowledge, though no trace of such a manuscript survived. The succession plan Hasan developed proved remarkable for its stability. Unlike typical medieval dynasties plagued by fratricidal conflicts, the leadership of Alamut passed smoothly. Hasan designated Kia Bujurgumid, one of his most trusted Deyas, as his successor. The transition occurred without violence or division, suggesting an institutional strength beyond mere personal loyalty. In his final years, Hasan's isolation became absolute. Servants left food outside his chambers, collecting empty plates without seeing him. His orders emerged as written documents, sealed with his personal mark. Some wondered if he still lived or if his closest advisors ruled in his name. But occasional theological treatises in his distinctive style suggested the old man still watched from his tower. Death came to Hasan-i Sabbah in May 1124. He was approximately 74 years old, having ruled Alamut for 34 years. His passing was kept secret for days while his successor secured control. When finally announced, the news spread through the Ismaili network via coded messages. In Damascus, Cairo, and dozens of mountain fortresses, believers mourned in private, their grief hidden from hostile populations. The legacy he left was multifaceted. On one level, he had created a state within states, a network that would survive another 130 years until the Mongol conquest. But more profoundly, he had demonstrated that a small, dedicated group could challenge empires through asymmetric means. His methods would echo through centuries, studied and imitated by revolutionary movements worldwide. The immediate aftermath of his death tested his system. Seljuk forces, hoping the network would collapse without its founder, launched attacks on several Ismaili fortresses. They discovered that Hasan had built something beyond a personality cult. His successors continued operations seamlessly, and within months, 2 Seljuk commanders who had led the attacks were dead, killed by Hasan-i who had infiltrated their households years earlier. Kia Bujurgumid proved a worthy successor, ruling for 14 years. He lacked Hasan's charisma but possessed administrative genius. Under his leadership, the network expanded into new territories, establishing strongholds in Syria that would become crucial during the Crusades. He also began the delicate process of normalizing relations with some neighboring powers, transforming the assassins from pure revolutionaries into political players. The training methods Hasan established evolved, but retained their core. Second and third generation Hasan-i learned from veterans who had executed successful missions. The oral traditions passed down included not just techniques but psychological insights, how to read facial expressions, detect deception, project harmlessness. These subtleties couldn't be written down but required direct transmission from master to student. The economic model Hasan created proved remarkably durable. The mountain fortresses achieved near-complete self-sufficiency, their terraced gardens and water systems marvels of engineering. Trade in specialized goods, fine steel, certain medicines, rare texts, provided income without dependence. This economic independence meant they couldn't be starved out or bought off, forcing enemies to deal with them as equals. The intelligence network outlived its creator by generations. Ismaili merchants traveled trade routes from India to Egypt, their commercial activities providing perfect cover for information gathering. In major cities, Ismaili-run hostels served traveling co-religionists while monitoring political developments. This network often knew of events before local rulers, selling information to fund operations. The myth of the assassins grew even faster than their actual influence. Christian and Muslim chroniclers competed to tell the most sensational stories. The Gardens of Paradise, the absolute obedience unto death, the supernatural abilities attributed to Fida-I. These legends served Ismaili purposes perfectly. Fear multiplied their power beyond their actual numbers. Later Grand Masters adapted Hasan's methods to changing circumstances. When the Mongols appeared on the horizon, some attempted diplomacy rather than resistance. Others tried to play Mongol factions against each other. Though ultimately unsuccessful, these adaptations showed the flexibility Hasan had built into his system. The destruction of Alamut by the Mongols in 1256 didn't end Hasan's influence. Survivors scattered but maintained networks. In India, Ismaili communities preserved not just religious teachings but operational knowledge. In Syria, remnants allied with various powers, their expertise in intelligence and subtle warfare always valuable. Even today, millions of Ismailis worldwide trace their spiritual lineage to the community Hasan established. The organizational principles Hasan developed appeared in unexpected places. The Venetian Council of Ten, established in 1310, bore striking resemblances to Alamut's hierarchy. The Japanese ninja clans, developing independently, arrived at similar solutions to similar problems. Modern intelligence agencies study Hasan's methods, finding relevance in his emphasis on patience, ideology, and human intelligence over technical means. His theological innovations influenced Islamic thought far beyond Ismailism. The emphasis on personal interpretation, the balance between exoteric and esoteric knowledge, the concept of justified deception in service of higher truth, these ideas percolated through various Islamic movements. Even Sunni scholars who condemned his methods found themselves grappling with his arguments. The architectural legacy of Alamut survived its destruction. The water collection systems Hasan designed inspired similar projects throughout the region. The library's cataloging system, partially reconstructed from surviving documents, showed innovations in organizing knowledge. The fortress's defensive arrangements influenced military architecture from India to Eastern Europe. Documents that survived Alamut's fall provided glimpses into daily operations. Supply lists showing the precise calculation of resources needed for multi-year sieges. Training schedules that balanced physical, intellectual, and spiritual development. Correspondence revealing the delicate negotiations that kept the network functioning despite surrounding hostility. The role of women in Hasan's system remains largely hidden. References suggest female members served crucial roles, particularly in intelligence gathering where they could access spaces forbidden to men. Some accounts mention female teachers in the fortresses, preserving and transmitting knowledge. But patriarchal chroniclers, both Muslim and Christian, minimized or ignored these contributions. The medical knowledge developed at Alamut had lasting impact. The precise understanding of poisons required equal knowledge of antidotes. Ismaili physicians became renowned for treating conditions others couldn't. Some of their pharmaceutical preparations, recorded in surviving fragments, showed sophisticated understanding of drug interactions and dosages. The psychological profiles Hasan developed for selecting and training operatives influenced later practices. His recognition that effective agents needed particular personality traits, not just skills, preceded modern psychological assessment by centuries. The techniques for maintaining cover identities, managing stress, and compartmentalizing information remained relevant to clandestine operations. Hasan's correspondence network demonstrated remarkable sophistication. Multiple cipher systems, including some that weren't broken until modern times, use of invisible inks from various organic sources, steganography, hiding messages within innocent-looking documents. These techniques spread through the medieval world, advancing the art of secret communication. The agricultural innovations at Alamut deserve recognition. Faced with feeding populations in mountain fortresses, Hasan's engineers developed intensive cultivation methods. Vertical gardens, sophisticated irrigation, crop rotation systems that maximized yield from minimal soil. These techniques spread to other mountain communities, enabling habitation of previously marginal lands. The philosophical questions Hasan raised persist. When is violence justified in service of higher ideals? How can a small group resist overwhelming power? What are the moral limits of deception and manipulation? These questions troubled medieval theologians and remain relevant to modern ethical debates. His influence on literature and legend exceeded his historical impact. From Marco Polo's embellished accounts to modern fiction, the figure of the old man of the mountain captured imaginations. Each retelling added layers of myth, but also preserved memory of a man who changed how power operated in the medieval world. The techniques of indoctrination Hasan perfected were studied and adapted. Religious orders, both Christian and Muslim, borrowed his methods of creating absolute loyalty. Political movements learned from his cell structure and security procedures. Even commercial organizations adopted his principles of compartmentalized knowledge and graduated initiation. Archaeological excavations at Alamut continue revealing surprises. Hidden chambers with documents preserved in sealed jars. Evidence of sophisticated metallurgy and chemistry. Architectural features suggesting knowledge of acoustics and engineering beyond what chronicles recorded. Each discovery adds detail to our understanding of Hasan's achievement. The paradox of Hasan's life remains striking. A man who valued knowledge above all else ordered the destruction of books he deemed dangerous. A theologian who preached divine justice authorized hundreds of murders. A leader who demanded absolute loyalty executed his own sons. These contradictions reveal the complexity of a figure who defies simple categorization. Modern Ismailis regard Hasan with mixture of pride and discomfort. His organizational genius and theological insights are celebrated. His violent methods are contextualized as products of their time. The current Aga Khan, spiritual leader of the largest Ismaili community, emphasizes the intellectual and spiritual over the militant aspects of their heritage. As the candle burns lower in our imagined medieval chamber, we see Hasan's true innovation. He didn't just create assassins. He created a system that transformed individual dedication into institutional power. His followers didn't just kill, they demonstrated that no earthly authority was absolute. His fortresses didn't just resist, they proved that ideas, properly organized and defended, could outlast empires. The old man of the mountain died in his bed, never defeated in battle, his network intact. Few medieval leaders could claim such success. But his greatest victory was psychological. He made power afraid. In a world where might supposedly made right, he proved that intelligence, patience, and absolute conviction could humble the mightiest. In a dimly lit chamber somewhere in medieval Paris, An elderly woman grinds dried leaves between weathered stones. The year is 1387, and she is preparing what she calls inheritance powder, a substance that will help an impatient heir claim their fortune a bit sooner than God intended. This scene, repeated in countless variations across medieval Europe and the Middle East, represents the intersection of chemistry, botany, and murder that define the assassin's craft. Imagine yourself examining the shelves of a medieval apothecary. Clay jars and leather pouches contain substances both healing and harmful. The difference between medicine and poison, as physicians knew well, often lay merely in the dose. Here, white arsenic sits beside antimony, mercury nestles next to lead salts, and dried mushrooms of various species occupy carefully labeled containers. The knowledge of poisons traced back to antiquity. Medieval assassins inherited accumulated wisdom from Egyptian embalmers, Greek philosophers, Roman politicians, and Arab alchemists. Each culture contributed its discoveries. The Egyptians knew of poisonous plants, the Greeks understood mineral toxins, the Romans perfected delivery methods, and the Arabs advanced the science of extraction and concentration. Aconitum, known as wolfsbane or monkshood, grew wild across European mountains. Its roots, when properly prepared, yielded a poison that caused numbness, irregular heartbeat, and eventual respiratory failure. The plant's very appearance seemed to warn of danger, deep purple flowers shaped like a monk's cowl, yet it also served legitimate purposes, treating joint pain when applied externally in minute quantities. The preparation required precise knowledge. Roots harvested in autumn contained the highest concentration of alkaloids. They were dried in darkness. Sunlight degraded the active compounds. Grinding had to be done carefully, as even inhaling the dust could cause symptoms. The final product was often mixed with wine or dissolved in oil, depending on the intended delivery method. Hemlock, famous for killing Socrates, grew commonly in damp meadows. Medieval poisoners valued it for causing gradual paralysis that began in the extremities and moved inward. Victims remained conscious until the end, unable to move or speak. The seeds and roots were most potent, though every part of the plant contained toxic alkaloids. But plant-based poisons had limitations. They degraded over time, their potency varying with growing conditions and preparation methods. Their taste and smell could alert victims. For these reasons, mineral poisons became increasingly popular among professional assassins. Arsenic, particularly in its white oxide form, became known as inheritance powder or succession powder. Colorless, tasteless, and stable, it could be added to food or drink without detection. Acute doses caused violent gastrointestinal symptoms followed by death. Chronic administration produced wasting diseases that mimicked natural illnesses. The source mattered greatly. The finest arsenic came from German mines, where it occurred naturally with silver ore. Venetian traders controlled much of the distribution, selling it ostensibly for rat control and cosmetics. The price fluctuated with demand, rising mysteriously during succession disputes or when elderly wealthy relatives lingered too long. Mercury, the liquid metal, fascinated alchemists and poisoners alike. In its pure form, it was less dangerous than its compounds. Mercury chloride, known as corrosive sublimate, destroyed tissue on contact. Mixed with food, it caused bloody vomiting and organ failure. Some assassins used mercury vapor, heating the metal in closed rooms to create invisible, deadly atmospheres. Lead, abundant and easily worked, provided subtle options. Lead acetate, called sugar of lead for its sweet taste, could be added to wine without arousing suspicion. Chronic exposure caused the painter's colic. abdominal pain, constipation, and eventual madness. Roman nobles had accidentally poisoned themselves with lead-sweetened wine. Medieval assassins did it deliberately to others. Antimony, a metalloid with properties between metals and non-metals, offered unique possibilities. It could be fashioned into cups or plates that slowly released poison into acidic foods. Victims dined from these vessels unknowingly, ingesting toxic doses over months. The Borgia family of Renaissance Italy supposedly perfected this method, though medieval assassins knew it centuries earlier. The delivery methods showed remarkable creativity. Poisoned rings with hidden compartments allowed substances to be slipped into cups during toasts. Gloves treated with toxins could poison through skin contact during formal greetings. Letters sealed with poisoned wax killed recipients who used their teeth to break the seal. Books became weapons in learned circles. Pages were treated with poison that absorbed through skin or became airborne when pages turned. The victim appeared to die while studying, suggesting natural causes like stroke or heart failure. This method required precise calculation. Too much poison and the book's owner might die before the intended target borrowed it. Clothing offered prolonged exposure opportunities. Shirts treated with mercury compounds caused gradual poisoning through skin absorption. Poisoned gloves given as gifts killed slowly over weeks of wearing. Even shoes could be treated, the poison entering through foot perspiration. The crossbow represented mechanical precision in assassination. Unlike longbows that required years of training and considerable strength, crossbows could be mastered relatively quickly. Their bolts penetrated armor that would stop arrows. Most importantly for assassins, they could be preloaded and concealed, fired with minimal movement. Small crossbows, sometimes called assassin's bows, were engineering marvels. Some measured barely a foot across when strung. The bow stave used composite materials, horn, sinew, and wood laminated together. This construction provided tremendous power despite the small size. Steel prods, when available, offered even more power in compact form. The bolts themselves received special attention. Standard hunting bolts were modified for human targets. Some had barbed heads that couldn't be extracted without causing massive damage. Others had hollow shafts filled with poison. The fletching was often removed or minimized to make the bolt less visible in flight. Concealment methods showed remarkable ingenuity. Crossbows were built into walking staffs, the mechanism hidden within carved wood. Some were designed to fold, fitting inside merchants' cases or pilgrims' bags. The smallest could be strapped to the forearm under loose sleeves, fired by flexing specific muscles. The mechanical triggers evolved toward hair trigger sensitivity. This allowed firing with minimal movement, crucial when striking from concealment. Some mechanisms used clockwork delays, allowing the assassin to be elsewhere when the bolt fired. These complex devices required skilled craftsmen who understood both engineering and discretion. Daggers remained the most personal tool of assassination. Every culture developed distinctive designs. The Persian khanjar with its curved blade, the European stiletto designed purely for thrusting, the Moorish jambia with its distinctive double curve. Each reflected different approaches to the grim task. The stiletto emerged as the assassin's ideal blade. Its narrow, needle-like point could penetrate gaps in armor or thick clothing. The triangular or square cross-section created wounds that wouldn't close naturally. Some versions had hollow grinds that created suction, preventing blood from clotting. The blade was purely offensive, useless for cutting, perfect for killing. Concealment drove design innovations. Blades were built into everyday objects. eating knives with false handles containing second blades, religious pendants that unscrewed to reveal spikes, belt buckles that detached as daggers. Some were designed to break apart, leaving the blade in the wound while the handle could be discarded. The metal itself mattered. Damascus steel, with its distinctive patterns, held exceptional edges. But for assassins, more important was steel that wouldn't reflect light or could pass undetected past lodestones used to detect weapons. Some blades were made from hardened copper or even glass, materials that wouldn't trigger magnetic detection. Poison grooves became standard features. These channels running along the blade held toxic substances that entered wounds. The grooves also weakened the blade deliberately, increasing chances it would break off inside victims. Some assassins scored their blades with rough stones, creating microscopic pockets that held poison even after wiping. The garrote offered silent efficiency. Silk cords were preferred, strong enough to strangle but soft enough to carry without detection. Some were woven with wire cores for added strength. Others had wooden handles that could be removed, leaving just an innocent-looking cord. The technique required surprise and proper positioning, making it ideal for assassins who could get close to targets. The shadow economy supporting assassination operated through multiple layers. At the surface were legitimate businesses, apothecaries, weaponsmiths, document forgers, who served normal customers while maintaining special relationships with those needing darker services. These merchants rarely knew their supply's ultimate purpose, maintaining plausible deniability. Contracts were rarely written and never explicitly. When documentation existed, it used elaborate codes and metaphors. A merchant might hire someone to collect a debt from a difficult customer. Payment terms discussed compensation for travel expenses or recovery of losses. These documents would seem innocent if discovered, their true meaning known only to parties involved. The intermediaries were crucial. People who connected those wanting someone dead with those willing to kill, while ensuring neither party knew the other's identity. These brokers operated from various covers: traveling merchants, religious pilgrims, diplomatic envoys. They took substantial cuts, sometimes half the total payment, for managing risk and maintaining separation. Payment methods reflected the need for discretion. Direct coin payment was rare, too easily traced. Instead, payment might come through canceled debts, trade concessions, or property transfers that appeared unrelated. Some assassins were paid in information, documents, maps, or intelligence valuable for other purposes. Others received protection or safe passage through certain territories. The price varied enormously based on target, method, and risk. Killing a merchant might cost what a skilled craftsman earned in a year. Eliminating a noble required sums that could buy entire estates. The highest prices were for making deaths appear natural. This required more skill, preparation, and often inside assistance. Cryptocurrency of sorts existed through letters of credit. Italian banking houses issued documents redeemable in distant cities. An assassin could be paid in Florence with papers cashable in Damascus, with no direct connection between transactions. The Templars and other military orders operated similar systems, inadvertently facilitating dark commerce. Insurance, in primitive form, emerged around assassination. Wealthy individuals paid regular sums to certain organizations, understanding that this protection meant they wouldn't be targeted. Some Italian cities operated semi-official systems where prominent citizens contributed to funds that paid assassins not to accept contracts against contributors. The forgery industry thrived alongside assassination. False documents provided cover identities, safe passage papers, and alibis. Master forgers studied regional seal designs, ink formulations, and parchment types. They could produce papal bulls, royal charters, or merchant credentials that would pass all but the most careful scrutiny. Codes and ciphers protected communications. Simple substitution ciphers gave way to more complex systems. The Polybius square, inherited from antiquity, allowed messages to be hidden in seemingly random number sequences. Book codes referenced specific words in commonly available texts. Some groups used cant languages, specialized vocabularies that sounded like normal conversation but carried hidden meanings. Musical notation concealed messages. Notes on a staff could represent letters, with rhythm indicating spacing. A simple song might contain detailed instructions for an assassination. These musical codes were particularly useful because they could be performed publicly without arousing suspicion. Visual codes appeared in art and architecture. Tapestries might contain hidden messages in their patterns. Stone carvings could indicate safe houses or dead drops through specific symbols. Even the arrangement of items in a shop window could convey information to those who knew the system. The chemistry involved grew increasingly sophisticated. Assassins learned to extract alkaloids using alcohol and acid solutions. They discovered that certain combinations enhanced toxicity. Mercury and arsenic together were deadlier than either alone. Some understood enough about dose-response relationships to calibrate poisons for specific effects. Antidotes were as valuable as poisons. Theriac, a complex mixture supposedly protecting against all poisons, sold for enormous sums. Though largely ineffective, the placebo effect and occasional lucky guesses maintained its reputation. Real antidotes were closely guarded secrets. Activated charcoal for some alkaloids, specific herbs for others. Testing methods evolved from crude to clever. The classical food taster remained common, but assassins learned to defeat them. Poisons that required cumulative doses, or that only activated when mixed with wine, could pass such tests. Some substances were harmless alone, but deadly when combined with common foods. Animal testing provided more reliable results. Assassins kept collections of rats, birds, and dogs for testing poison potency. They learned that different species responded differently. What killed a dog might not affect a bird. This knowledge helped both in preparing poisons and protecting against them. The tools for preparing poisons showed specialized evolution. Mortars and pestles of specific stones that wouldn't react with chemicals. Glass vessels for storing acids. Precise scales for measuring tiny quantities. Furnaces capable of specific temperatures for chemical reactions. These items, innocent individually, marked professional poisoners when found together. Breathing apparatus appeared centuries before their supposed invention. Assassins working with toxic vapors used water-soaked cloths, hollow reeds for breathing outside contaminated areas, and primitive masks filled with herbs thought to neutralize poisons. Though often ineffective, they showed understanding of airborne toxins. The preservation of knowledge happened through careful tradition. Master assassins took apprentices, teaching them gradually over years. Information was compartmentalized. One might know poison preparation, another blade work, a third about codes. This prevented any individual from knowing too much while preserving the complete system. Guilds, though never official, existed in practice. Loose associations of professionals who maintained standards, resolved disputes, and occasionally coordinated to prevent oversupply from driving down prices. They had no formal structure but operated through reputation and mutual benefit. The cat-and-mouse game with authorities drove constant innovation. As detection methods improved, assassination techniques evolved. When food tasters became common, delayed action poisons appeared. When bodyguards multiplied, long-range weapons developed. When documents required multiple seals, forgery techniques advanced accordingly. Regional variations reflected local conditions. Italian assassins favored subtle poisons suitable for court intrigue. Germanic killers preferred mechanical devices matching their engineering traditions. Middle Eastern assassins emphasized daggers and close combat, reflecting cultural values about facing death directly. The economics of fear multiplied the actual threat. For every real assassination, rumors suggested 10 more. This inflation served everyone's purposes. Assassins seemed more numerous and capable, rulers justified harsh measures, and populations accepted restrictions. The mythology became as powerful as the reality. As dawn approached in our imagined medieval world, the assassin's toolkit represented more than just weapons and poisons. It embodied centuries of accumulated knowledge, careful observation, and grim innovation. Each tool reflected not just the desire to kill, but the need to do so precisely, quietly, and deniably. The legacy of these methods extends beyond their bloody purpose. The chemistry advanced medical knowledge. The metallurgy improved legitimate crafts. The codes and ciphers laid groundwork for modern cryptography. Even the organizational methods influenced later intelligence services. Behind the heavy tapestry depicting the triumph of Charlemagne, a narrow passage runs through the stone walls of Château de Vincennes. The year is 1422, and Charles VII of France stands motionless in this hidden corridor, listening to his own counselors discuss his future. He trusts none of them completely, for his own father went mad, some say from poison, and his mother may have plotted against him. This scene of royal paranoia, replicated across every noble house in medieval Europe, reveals how the fear of assassination shaped the very architecture of power. Imagine yourself waking as a duke in your fortified manor. Before your eyes even open, you lie still, listening. The guard outside your door should shift his weight every few minutes. If he doesn't, something may be wrong. The morning light should come through the same gap in the shutters. If the angle is different, someone may have entered during the night. These calculations happen before conscious thought, trained into you since childhood. Your bedchamber itself is a fortress within a fortress. The door is reinforced with iron bands, barred from the inside with a beam that takes 2 men to move. But you know doors are obvious. Assassins expect them. So you've had other precautions built. The floorboards near the entrance conceal bells that ring when stepped upon. The windows are too narrow for a man to enter, positioned high enough that arrows from outside would hit only the ceiling. Beneath your bed, a trapdoor leads to a shaft cut through living rock. It emerges in the stables, where trusted horses are always saddled. You've practiced the escape route monthly since you were 12, able to navigate it now in complete darkness. Your father had it built after his cousin was murdered in his bed, trapped when assassins blocked the only door. Rising requires its own ritual. Your body servant enters first. He's been with your family for 3 generations, his loyalty tested through decades. Still, you watch his hands, notice if he seems nervous. He brings washing water that he's watched drawn from the well, heated in a pot he selected randomly from the kitchen. Even this simple act of morning hygiene carries risk. Your clothing comes from locked chests that only you and your most trusted servant can access. Each garment is inspected for pins, thorns, or rough patches that might indicate poison. The Italian fashion for tight-fitting clothes isn't just vanity. Loose robes can conceal weapons or provide cover for an assassin's movements. Your doublet has a high collar reinforced with mail, protecting against garrote or dagger thrust to the throat. Breakfast presents particular challenges. The great hall where you must eat publicly is a theater of potential threats. Every servant, every guest, every entertainer could be a killer in disguise. Yet refusing to appear would show weakness, inviting different kinds of attacks. So you perform the elaborate dance of noble dining, where every bite could be your last. The food taster stands behind your chair, a man whose sole purpose is to die in your place. He's well paid. His family will be cared for if he succumbs, but you've noticed the tremor in his hands that grows worse each year. He samples every dish, every cup of wine, waiting the prescribed time before you partake. But you know poisons exist that take hours or days to act, that only become toxic when mixed with other substances. Your cupbearer is your nephew, a boy of 14 from a cadet branch of the family. Using relatives for such positions ensures some loyalty through blood, though history is littered with nephews who poisoned uncles. The cup itself is made of unicorn horn, actually narwhal tusk, supposedly able to neutralize poisons. You don't believe this, but maintain the fiction, as the belief itself provides some protection through deterrence. The table arrangement follows strict protocols. You sit with your back to the wall, facing the room's entrances. Guards stand close enough to intervene, but not so close that they could strike before being stopped. The salt cellar, that precious commodity, sits directly before you. A Renaissance innovation will later add mechanisms to test for poison, but for now, you simply ensure no one else touches it. Between courses, you observe everything. The servant whose pour is shakier than usual. The guest who watches you too intently or not at all. The new minstrel whose lute case could conceal a crossbow. Your wife notices your distraction and touches your hand. Even she doesn't fully understand the constant vigilance required to survive. The architecture of your castle reflects generations of accumulated fear. Every improvement, every modification serves security over comfort. The narrow spiral staircases turn clockwise ascending, favoring right-handed defenders above. Murder holes pierce the ceilings of passages, allowing boiling oil or crossbow bolts to rain down on intruders. But these defenses assume external attack. Internal betrayal requires subtler protections. Your private chambers connect through hidden doors to unexpected rooms. From your study, you can slip into the chapel. From there, a passage behind the altar leads to the tower. These routes are known only to you and change periodically. Even trusted servants might not know where you actually sleep on any given night. The Great Hall's acoustic design serves double duty. While musicians perform from the gallery, the architecture carries whispers from certain corners to your seat. You can hear conversations your guests believe private. This intelligence often proves more valuable than any spy's report, though sometimes you hear things that increase rather than decrease your paranoia. Your bedchamber contains multiple beds, and you rarely sleep in the same one twice. Sometimes you don't sleep in the bedchamber at all, choosing instead a servant's room or even the guard room. This unpredictability exhausts you, never getting proper rest, but predictable patterns invite assassination. The windows of your castle tell their own story of fear. Lower levels have narrow arrow slits barely wide enough to admit light. Upper floors have larger openings but with iron grills that would stop a crossbow bolt. Glass, when you can afford it, is set in small panes, harder to break silently than large sheets. Some windows are false, painted on walls to confuse distant observers counting defenders. Your treasure room doubles as a final refuge. Behind the gold and silver lies another door, leading to a chamber stocked with weapons, water, and preserved food. From there, a tunnel extends beyond the castle walls, emerging in a grove of trees planted specifically to provide cover. Your grandfather used this route to escape during a siege. You pray you'll never need it. The chapel provides no sanctuary from suspicion. Assassins have struck during Mass, counting on the moment of prayer to lower guard. You've reinforced the family pew with iron plates hidden beneath carved wood. Your prayer book has metal covers thick enough to stop a dagger. Even kneeling, you position yourself to rise quickly, hand near your sword. Your confessor presents a particular challenge. Religious obligation requires revealing your sins, but political reality makes full confession dangerous. You speak in generalities, admitting pride and wrath without specifying which rivals you've plotted against. He knows you're holding back. You know he reports to the bishop, but this dance maintains necessary fictions. Court ceremonies become elaborate security operations. When receiving ambassadors, every participant is searched, diplomatically but thoroughly. Musicians' instruments are examined, sometimes disassembled. Gifts are accepted by servants wearing thick gloves, then quarantined until proven safe. The throne itself has been modified with springs and plates, making it impossible for anyone but you to sit without triggering hidden blades. Your physicians pose constant concern. They have access to your body, knowledge of your weaknesses, and means to administer substances. You employ 3, ensuring they check each other's work. Their families live in comfortable captivity within your lands, hostages in all but name. Still, you wonder if their ministrations do more harm than good. The management of servants requires delicate balance. Too harsh and they'll harbor resentment that gold can exploit. Too lenient and they'll grow careless, creating vulnerabilities. You rotate assignments regularly, preventing anyone from becoming too familiar with routines. Yet this same rotation prevents the deep loyalty that comes from long service. Your spy master reports weekly, sharing intelligence about potential threats. But who watches him? You employ multiple intelligence networks, each unaware of the others. Sometimes you feed different information to each, seeing which secrets reach your enemies. This web of deception exhausts you, but the alternative is trusting completely, a luxury no noble can afford. Travel multiplies every danger. On the road, your protections are reduced to what armed men can provide. You never announce routes in advance, sometimes changing direction mid-journey. Inns are scouted by advance guards who sample food and check for hidden passages. Often you sleep in your carriage, guards maintaining watch through the night. When visiting other nobles, Paranoia reaches new heights. Their castles contain unknown passages, their servants have unknown loyalties. You bring your own food, your own wine, sometimes even your own bedding. Your host takes offense, but better wounded pride than a poisoned guest. These visits are necessary for politics but harrowing for health. Your marriage negotiations for your children become security assessments. Which families have histories of fratricide or patricide? Which regions produce the most accomplished poisoners? Your daughter's beauty matters less than whether her husband's family can be trusted. Your son's bride is chosen as much for her family's military strength as her dowry. The economy of protection drains your treasury. Guards' salaries consume a third of your income. Bribes to ensure loyalty take another portion. Castle modifications, though spread over years, represent massive investments. The irony doesn't escape you. The wealth that makes you a target is spent protecting against targeting. Your library contains books on poison and antidotes, studied like military strategies. You've learned which symptoms suggest which toxins, though this knowledge often increases fear rather than providing protection. Every headache might be mercury, every stomach pain could be arsenic. The physicians say you're healthy, but how would they know if you were being slowly poisoned? Letters arrive sealed with wax you recognize, but seals can be forged. You've developed personal codes with important correspondence, specific words or phrases that confirm authenticity. Still, you wonder if your enemies have broken these codes. Sometimes you send false messages to yourself, testing whether your communications are compromised. Your children grow up in this atmosphere of suspicion. Your son, barely 10, already checks his food and varies his routines. Your daughter knows to trust no one completely, not even family. You've stolen their innocence to give them survival skills. Sometimes you wonder if the life you're preserving is worth living. The night brings deepest fears. Darkness conceals movement, masks identity, muffles sound. You've installed locks, bars, and guards, but also more creative defenses. Bells on strings across corridors. Sand on stone floors to reveal footprints. Even trained dogs that sleep in your chamber, alert to unfamiliar scents. Your dreams, when sleep finally comes, replay every close call. The servant who dropped a tray, possibly reaching for a weapon. The hunting accident that might have been attempted murder. The fever that struck after a feast, leaving you weak for months. You wake gasping, hand on your dagger, wondering if any threat is real or if paranoia has become its own poison. The arras behind which you sometimes hide to observe your court has become a symbol. These heavy tapestries could conceal assassins, but they also hide you, allowing surveillance of your own household. You found servants stealing, overheard plots against rivals, discovered infidelities. The knowledge gained is valuable, but the act of hiding from your own people reveals how far trust has eroded. Your fool provides unexpected security intelligence. His jest and apparent madness grant him access to conversations others wouldn't dare have openly. He reports what he hears, trading information for protection. You wonder sometimes if his foolishness is entirely an act, if perhaps he's the smartest person in your court. The tournaments and hunts that should provide recreation become security nightmares. In the melee of combat or chase, an accident could easily occur. You wear the finest armor available, but a lance point finding a gap would look like misfortune. You participate because absence would show weakness, but enjoyment is impossible when every competitor could be an assassin. Your religious obligations conflict with security needs. Pilgrimage would demonstrate piety, but requires traveling through territories you don't control. Public charity means contact with unknown persons who could carry disease or daggers. Even taking communion requires trusting that the wine hasn't been poisoned, a sacrilege you must still consider. The portrait gallery of your ancestors reminds you how many died unnaturally. Your grandfather, poisoned at his own wedding feast. Your uncle, struck down by a hunting companion. Your father, who died in his prime of a sudden illness. Their painted eyes seem to warn against trusting anyone, even family. Your own mortality planning assumes unnatural death. Your will is updated constantly, stored in multiple locations. You've arranged for various succession scenarios, trying to prevent the chaos that often follows assassination. Your tomb is already built, though you hope not to need it soon. Sometimes you visit it, wondering if your paranoia will be vindicated or mocked by history. The younger nobles at court don't understand your caution. They see elaborate precautions as cowardice, multiple food tasters as excess. They haven't yet lost friends to poison or seen relatives murdered in their beds. You were once like them before experience taught harsh lessons. Now you watch them with pity, knowing their education will come through blood. The diplomatic gifts you receive are beautiful threats. An ornate dagger from the Sultan, Is it honoring your martial prowess or suggesting your death? A rare manuscript from the Pope, might its pages be poisoned? A caged songbird from a rival, could its food introduce disease to your household? Each gift is quarantined, examined, sometimes destroyed despite its value. Your astrologer provides another layer of security consultation. While you don't fully believe in celestial influence, the patterns he describes help randomize your schedule. If Mars ascending means you should avoid travel, you stay home, not from superstition but because unpredictability protects. Your enemies might also consult astrologers, so acting against predictions confounds their planning. The feast days that punctuate the calendar become security challenges. Traditional celebrations require traditional appearances, making you predictable. Yet absence would offend both God and vassals. You attend but arrive late or leave early, never by expected routes. The common people see a pious lord observing customs. You know you're performing an elaborate evasion. As our candle burns low in this chamber of fears, the true cost of nobility becomes clear. The wealth and power that seemed so desirable from below become chains when viewed from within. Every comfort is compromised by caution, every pleasure poisoned by paranoia. The throne that represents ultimate authority becomes a trap, making its occupant the ultimate target. The dawn brings no relief, only another day of vigilance, another day of wondering which smile hides hatred, which bow conceals a blade. Another day of tasting fear with every meal, sleeping with one eye open, trusting no one completely. This is the price of power in an age where assassination is both art and science. Yet you endure, as your fathers did, as your sons will. Not from courage but from necessity, not from strength but from stubborn refusal to yield. The assassins may be patient, but so are you. They may be clever, but you're learning. And perhaps, if fortune favors you, you'll die of old age in your bed, the greatest victory a medieval noble can achieve. As our journey through the shadow-draped world of medieval assassination draws to its close, we find ourselves back in the present moment, far from those frost-covered rooftops where patient killers waited through endless nights, distant from the mountain fortresses where young men trained to become living weapons, removed from the paranoid chambers where nobles started at every unexpected sound. Tonight, we've walked through 4 centuries of carefully orchestrated death. We've felt the cold numbing the fingers of an assassin maintaining his vigil, grinding poisons by candlelight while the city slept unaware. We've stood with Hasan-i Sabbah as he transformed a mountain stronghold into a network that would make emperors tremble. We've examined the tools of this grim trade, the subtle poisons that mimicked natural disease, the concealed blades that ended arguments permanently, the codes and ciphers that protected deadly secrets. And finally, we've glimpsed the world from behind those heavy tapestries where nobles hid from their own households, understanding how the fear of assassination shaped every aspect of medieval elite life, how it influenced architecture, altered social customs, and turned simple acts like eating breakfast into elaborate defensive rituals. What strikes us most, perhaps, is not the violence itself, but the patience it required. In our age of instant communication and immediate gratification, it's difficult to imagine spending years establishing a false identity, or slowly grinding minerals into powder that might never be used, or checking every shadow, every servant, every gift for signs of lethal intent. The medieval assassin's world was one of profound loneliness, cut off from normal human connections by the nature of their profession, living entire lives under assumed names, carrying secrets that couldn't be shared even in confession. They moved through society but were never truly part of it. Ghosts before death claimed them. Yet, in studying these dark practices, we also see remarkable innovation. The chemistry they developed advanced medical knowledge. Their organizational structures influenced intelligence services that protect nations today. Even their mistakes taught valuable lessons about human nature, power, and the lengths people will go to obtain or preserve it. Consider how different your evening meal is from that paranoid noble's feast. You don't need food tasters or unicorn horn cups. Your bedroom door locks for privacy, not survival. The knock at your door brings delivered food or visiting friends, not potential death. These simple freedoms, which we take for granted, would seem miraculous to those who lived in constant fear of the poisoner's art. The gentle hum of your heating system replaces the crackling of defensive fires that were never allowed to fully die. Electric lights banish shadows that once might have concealed killers. Your soft sheets and comfortable mattress replace the hard beds that medieval nobles abandoned nightly, seeking safety in unpredictability. As you settle deeper into your pillow, feeling the weight of sleep beginning to pull at your consciousness, remember that the walls around you are for comfort, not fortification. The locks on your doors are precautions, not life or death necessities. The night sounds outside your window are just the ordinary music of modern life. Cars passing, wind through trees, perhaps a distant train, not the careful footsteps of someone who means you harm. Our exploration tonight has taken us through dark passages of human history, but like all history, it serves to illuminate where we are now. We live in an age not without its dangers, certainly, but one where the elaborate precautions of medieval nobility would seem absurd, where most of us will never need to vary our routes home or test our food for poison. The assassins of old have faded into history and legend. Alamut is ruins visited by tourists. The poisons that once commanded king's ransoms are now carefully regulated medicines or banned substances. The elaborate codes and ciphers have given way to encryption algorithms that would seem like magic to medieval minds. So as you drift towards sleep, let the weight of those dangerous centuries slip away. Let the paranoia of princes and the patience of killers become just stories from a distant past. Feel grateful for the ordinary safety of your modern life, where the greatest danger at dinner is usually just overcooking. The candles we've imagined throughout our journey can be extinguished now, replaced by the gentle glow of whatever small lights comfort you in the darkness. The stone walls of castles dissolve into the familiar textures of your own room. The constant vigilance required for medieval survival can give way to the peaceful surrender of approaching sleep. Thank you for joining me on this journey through one of history's darker chapters, for walking those dangerous medieval streets and standing in those fearful noble chambers. Tomorrow's light will bring you back to a world where such elaborate precautions against assassination exist only in fiction and fading memory. May your sleep be untroubled by the shadows we've explored. May your dreams, if they come, be of safer times and kinder purposes. And may you wake refreshed, grateful for the simple security of living in an age where professional assassins have become merely the stuff of history documentaries and entertainment. Rest well, friends. Let the past remain past, and know that you are safe. Good night.